I'm John Driscoll. I'm an Army veteran, and that's Randy LeCoq. He's a veteran of the 25th Infantry Division, which he claims was doing jungle training from the North Shore of Hawaii for this terrible awful time. I went up there one time, just once, and I saw people selling T-shirts and surfing. So, anyhow, Randy's been a Foreign Service officer his life, and half of it's been with Russia, mostly in the Soviet Union, and the other half in Africa and Italy. He's very knowledgeable guy. And it's like Simon says, if you name a division, he gets all excited about it and tell you everything you want to know about that division. And it's Randy that talked me into going to the Battle of the Bulge battlefield. I had other reasons to be in Europe, and he said, well, let's go over there. So we spent a week over there, and I'm really glad I did, because something important happened there. And I think, for me, this is all about character, the American character. You'll see that the people who were involved just wanted to go home and wanted to get it over with. Yet they didn't run when Hitler's forces came across the border unexpectedly at night, and he expected them all to run because we thought we were all mongrels. And it was a bad situation. It's not a place you want to be, but they were there and they didn't run. And Randy will go into that in a few minutes, but before he takes his part of it, I want to talk to you for a few minutes about who we were fighting. It kind of gets lost in all this. There was a woman named Dorothy Thompson, who was a pretty well-known columnist.
I'm going to interrupt just for a second, sorry. Technical difficulties. Will you talk closer to the mic?
Yeah. Dorothy Thompson.
Okay, thank you.
She was a well-known columnist, syndicated columnist before the war. And between 1936 and 39, she summarized her articles in a book called Let the Record Speak. And she had been telling us clueless Americans, you really got to pay attention to what's going on over here. This is 1936 to 39. This is not good. And so in this book, she wrote, she kind of summarized it in plain language. She said, this, it seems to me, is the lesson in the news of the last 3 years. National Socialism or Nazism in Germany will become the most world-disturbing event of the century. Though Nazism is not in its nature only a German phenomenon. Nazism is a fusion of elements that are present in the minds of men and women everywhere. And it does offer one answer to political, social, and economic problems that everywhere press for solutions. But Americans must understand there's a fundamental incompatibility between any form of social order based upon political and economic freedom, that's us, and the dynamic aggrandizing of fascism or National Socialism. Nazism is a total revolution. Well, if you read a little bit more about that, it's a counter-revolution. The Enlightenment values that we call liberal values, but from the Enlightenment of liberty and equality, all those things that we hold dear, Nazism tries to do away with that. Liberty or equality, those are two good measures right there. If liberty is increasing, great. If equality is increasing, great. If it's going the other way, there's a problem. She saw National Socialism as a break with reason and with humanism and with the Christian ethics that are at the base of liberalism and democracy. Nazism is similar to communism by breaking with the ethic or science that elevates the search for truth into the noblest of human passion. But much more than communism, Nazism denies the very concept of the inviolability of the human being. Unlike communism, she saw Nazism treating all of life as the unremitting struggle of tribal groups for biological survival. In this struggle, the lie is openly accepted as a useful means to an end, dealing with what Nazis believed to be naive and decadent democracies. Since Nazis subjugate and destroy the common sense that grows out of human experience, Thompson wrote that National Socialism is the enemy of whatever is sunny, reasonable, pragmatic, common sense, freedom-loving, life-affirming, form-seeking, and conscious of tradition. She concluded, therefore, I believe that the conflict will be conjoined, certainly in the realm of ideas and probably by force, not in the East, but in the West. And I have believed that sooner or later, by force or diplomacy, by political means or military means, the Western world will have to take a stand against the Nazi challenge. It's too late to answer the slogans of fascism with the slogans of democracy. It's too late to hope that we shall preserve democracy without effort, intelligence, responsibility, character, and great sacrifice. In the next decade, there will be no free rides to freedom. It will not be preserved by geography or by the insistent chant that no matter where else it is raining, it's bound to be sunny here, if not today, then tomorrow. That year that she published this, which was in November of 1939, in that January, we in Montana elected a Nazi to Congress, Jacob Thorkelson. He was a Norwegian sea captain, and he was elected for 2 years. He was a doctor out of Butte. I have some family who were part of that medical community then. And my dad's cousin, my second cousin, J.P. King, was sent back to Annapolis as a plebe. And he and another fellow from Butte who was on the faculty, they went into Washington to meet Thorkelson, the congressman from Butte, and so forth. And said that he told me, I interviewed J.P. in an oral history, and he said the guy was a raving Nazi. He had files of Jewish people, black people. And if you Google him, you'll see that Walter Winchell considered him the mouthpiece for the Nazis in America. He sued Winchell. But he put all these things, protocols of Zion and all that, into the congressional record. He was pretty bad. And he's the one that Jeanette Rankin beat in the next election. So we had a Nazi, and then we had a person who would not vote for war, and I admire that. But we just were not too interested here in Montana in getting into that fight. And so when the war was declared, it was declared after the Day of Infamy, and Jeanette Rankin voted against it for war the second time. But what I didn't realize is that Hitler, in what Stephen Ambrose called an act of supreme idiocy, 3 days later Hitler declared war on us. And then we, in turn, that afternoon declared war on him. And in that declaration of war, Jeanette Rankin abstained. So only 17% of the American people wanted to go to war against the Germans. It's like, are you kidding me? And but that's kind of an intelligent reaction, I think. Like somebody said, war is the last resort. Well, in Montana, we had 500,000 people. We had half the population that we have now. And across the 56 counties, 57,000 people went to war. So that means 1,017 for each county. And that included about 567 women. Well, I mean, where did all those people come? That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people for today's Montana. And we found that, like in Hyson, Treasure County, which you can't hardly feel the clerk and recorder now, but you go into the bedroom of one of the guys that was killed. Senator Dave Manning's son was killed the day that we broke into Bastogne. He's with the 80th Infantry Division. And in his bedroom, they have the names of all the people from Hyson, from Treasure County, the small county. And we counted 140, including 8 who were killed. And it's very impressive. That means, though, if they only had 140 only, then somebody else had a lot more than 1,000. And likely Helen or Lewis and Clark County was one of them, certainly Butte and Great Falls. Now, I had the occasion 30 years ago to spend a lot of time trying to understand the neo-Nazi movement here in Montana. And we had, all the Minutemen and the Silent Brotherhood, all that kind of stuff. And what I learned of that from in the 10 years preceding 1996, I put in a War College strategic research paper, which you can look on the internet and kind of take you back. it's called a chaotic threat, right-wing terrorism in America. And I said, you can't tell them by what they call themselves. You know, a patriot is not necessarily a patriot, a Christian is not necessarily a Christian, but by what they do. And I listed some of the things like criminal foraging and misuse of words designed to mess up communication rather than communicate clearly and so forth. And that was interesting. One of the things I had in there, and I really thought I was right on from everything I saw, was that they're terribly anti-Semitic, just rabidly anti-Semitic, even at the international level. So I call it super terrorism. But I was wrong about that. To be a Nazi, you don't have to be anti-Semitic. You could be against Turks, for example. In Western, in Germany, just now they're finishing, just publishing a 2,000-word trial document, 2,000-page, of a trial that lasted of 5 people who had been in an underground that was called the National Socialist Underground, and they had been using Turks as a scapegoat. They'd killed 10. And it points out, and that's in a nation that this guy who wrote, finished this in 1999, Roderick Stackelberg, he was on the faculty at Gonzaga teaching political science for 35 years. This is a really good book about Hitler's Germany. But he just said, you know, anti-Semitism doesn't have a chance in Germany, nor does it in Israel and so forth. And the problem is that it's not whether it's anti-Semitism, it's whether it's a scapegoat, right? A scapegoat, us against them. A scapegoat is a Jewish term. It's about putting all the sins of the people on a goat and sending the goat out into the desert. So that's kind of an indicator of not whether it's anti-Semitism, but whether there's a scapegoat. Anyhow, this Roderick Stackelberg, this book is great. If you want to use I happened on it by accident. I went to my first class reunion, my 50th, and the guy just died this spring, and I go, wow, this is great. So I'm reading it after he died, and in here it's got timelines. It tells you when the Jews were not allowed to tutor Aryan children, and when the law was where they weren't allowed to be pharmacists, and when the law was when they weren't allowed to get PhDs, when they were not allowed to say Heil Hitler anymore, if they were so inclined. And Randy has made the point to me several times that it was all about like slice and bit bread, one slice at a time. And if you look at these timelines, it was one slice at a time, just constantly, for years and years. And so I really recommend this book. And in addition to talking about the realities of the whole anti-Semitism, which was obviously the case in Germany, it talks about the living space. You know, they wanted to get right. The second big mistake Hitler already made, and that's to attack Russia to get living space. And he felt that the Slavic people, there were lower forms of life, and they had actually had an order. You'll see here to get rid of 31 million of them to make room for the Germans. So I really recommend this when you're feeling kind of thoughtful about all this, if it ever comes to that. And then the other thing is to talk for just a minute about the SS, because that figures greatly in this story that we're going to tell tonight. What happened there, I mean, Bill Riley's got this new book, Killing the SS. Well, that's fine, some of the familiar names, but how did it happen? How did actual people become SS people? What was it? How did Hitler control his people? And because not all Germans were Nazis, that's for darn sure. And so this book talks about how in the 20s, Hitler, they had the beer hall riots and fights and freedom of speech type demonstrations, people fighting with each other. And they always had these people called hall protectors. They were just tough guys. And that was through the 20s. And then in the early 30s, when Hitler actually became chancellor under Hindenburg, and he was actually in a legal position, the brown shirts, which everybody had paid attention to, that was the ones that everybody could see. They were wearing brown shirts, and there were as many as 4.5 million of them, certainly more than 1 million. they were led by Ernest Röhm, and he was a good buddy with Hitler. Well, Röhm thought, well, we're going to have something to say about the Wehrmacht, the German army, and some of these other things. And Hitler had different ideas, so he told the leaders of the brown shirts, send your boys home, take the time off. We'll have a meeting in the resort in Bavaria. We'll talk about it. So they were all excited. So Hitler shows up with a team of people led by Joachim Peiper, who you'll hear about later, his personal aide, a young guy. And they go to Röhm's room and they give him a gun and say, kill yourself in 15 minutes or we'll be back. And he said, basically, screw you. And so they came back. Hitler wasn't with them this time, and Papen and some of the others took him down to a police barracks, so it looked official, and they killed him. And that night they killed this guy. I noticed for the first time he has 277. That's the most definite number I've seen that night, but I've seen it range between 77 and 1,000 people because they're not sure. People around Germany that night in the same way who were potential opponents in brown shirts or in some part of the German government. So the next 2 or 3 days, as people were waking up, they're going, what? And Hitler informed them that he'd saved Germany from an overthrow by treasonous people. And he got away with it. Some key people in the church and in the judicial system turned the other way. And maybe they were scared, whatever their reasons were, but they let it go. And after that, the SS, which had been the hall protectors, and over time nobody was watching it, but Himmler, who didn't like publicity, was organizing them quietly, and he had it really well organized. And by then they were called the protection squads, or in German SS. And so after that, the SS became a law of its own. And so after that, the SS was the general SS that put stars on your shirt if you were Jewish. They were the Death's Head SS, which was a secret thing inside the Hitler operation that created guards for the concentration camps. And later on, Rudolf Hess, when he was finishing his war crime trial, he was the commander of Auschwitz. He said, I had these people working for me, and if you weren't there, you cannot believe how contemptuous they were of the people that they were guarding. They just hated them. So they were heavily indoctrinated, the Death's Head SS. And then you had Himmler. Himmler became, the Gestapo was created, it's all in the timeline, but Himmler became the inspector of the Gestapo. And then he was given by Hitler control over the Prussian domestic police, and he turned these large numbers of people into a Gestapo. And the Gestapo was 45,000 of them. And they had pretty much unlimited arrest powers. They carried a medallion around their neck. And then they were aided by 65,000 Gestapo agents and by 100,000 Gestapo informers. They were SS, all under this one, under Himmler. Then, when Germany went into Russia, this Eisenstadt groups went behind them when the Germans attacked Russia in 4 big groups, and their job was to start killing German Jews, especially ones that were working in the Russian government, and they did that with a vengeance. So you had those 4 groups, all under Himmler, all under directly, personally loyal, personally sworn to follow Hitler. And then you had the weapons SS. And the weapons SS are the Waffen SS. They were the ones that became the first battalions of many that went into Poland when they invaded Poland. But there was only about 3 regiments of them altogether, here and there, a company or a battalion. But they were very, very good fighters. They were ferocious. They were dedicated. They were fanatical. They thought they were the missionaries for the new Third Reich. They were physically met a pretty high standard, intellectually or educationally. It was a lower standard than the Wehrmacht, and they were heavily indoctrinated. And they are the ones that when the Nazis invaded France in May of 1940 and rolled up the whole thing within the month, there was Army Group A up in the north getting around the Maginot Line, and the French and the English went up there to meet him with the best troops. And while they were doing that, it turned out to be a feint. 45 and a half German divisions came through the Ardennes forest, which is what we're going to be talking about today. 45 and a half divisions, and some of them were oriented to go fast. The Blitzkrieg, when we first heard about that, and because they hadn't used that up in Poland. and they had only 2 Panzer SS divisions, that's armor divisions, so it got to be 2 divisions. By the time this battle rolled around in December of 1944, there were 41 SS divisions. 10 of them were armored. 3 of those were Panzer Grenadier, which is a mix of infantry and armor, and 7 were armored divisions. And 4 of them were in this battle, and they're the ones that were the 6th Panzer Army that was the main attack that was going to make it to Antwerp. And Randy will tell you about that. So this was a fight that not only stopped Hitler's last gasp, this was a fight that put a stake through the SS. It was very important, and they were not easy. It was not easy to do. So, as far as the battle is concerned, did Mike Gillerin show up here? Mike, yeah. Mike let us go through some of his dad's stuff, all of his dad's stuff. Ed Gillerin and Bill Coldiron were in the 116th Air Defense Artillery Battalion there from Helena. And I don't know that Mike realizes it because his dad always talked about how proud they were to get 15 of their 16 90mm anti-aircraft guns onto the shore at Omaha Beach. They had to be towed by Caterpillars. Then they towed them all the way across France. But they happened to be in the right place at the right time. And so when Piper, the guy I told you about that was Hitler's aide, took the long spear to go right through this whole thing to get to Antwerp first, to get across the Meuse first, he was counting on 112 junkers loaded with German paratroopers to come and hold the bridges and so forth, to make it easier. And Mike's dad and Bill Coldiron were part of the gun crews that shot down 44 of those airplanes that night. That had a huge effect. And the other, a few airplane loads of paratroopers landed close to where they were supposed to, but the commanders on the ground said this is a waste of time, and they started walking back to Germany. And then a lot of them were blown off into Holland and into Germany. But this book, Mike's dad was going through this. You can see he was going through it over and over again, figuring out, making notes. And it's called Bitter Woods, and it's written by John Eisenhower, General Eisenhower's son. He had access to a lot of the command and control, and I found it very helpful of all the books because it kind of looked at it from an organizational point of view. So that would be a good one. Randy's got a ton that he's read. I've read a couple more, but that was very helpful. And then finally, I'm going to sit down. In our book, Churchill, well into this fight, he said to the House of Commons, by mid-January, the fight had been going on for quite some time, he said, I've seen it suggested that the terrific battle which has been proceeding since 16 December on the American front is an Anglo-American battle. In fact, however, the United States troops have done almost all the fighting and have suffered almost all the losses. They have suffered losses almost equal to those on both sides in the Battle of Gettysburg. Only one British Army Corps has been engaged in this action. All the rest of the 30 or more divisions which have been fighting continuously for the last months are United States troops. The Americans have engaged 30 or 40 men for every one we have engaged, and we have lost 60 to 80 men for every one of ours. And that is the point I wish to make. Care must be taken in telling our proud tale, not to claim for the British Army an undue share of what is undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war, and will, I believe, be regarded as an ever-famous American victory. With that, here's Randy.